Hi, this is Jacqui B. Welcome to the long-awaited part 2 of my autobiography, Just Do You, which is my journey from madness to zen. I wanted to do more than just an audiobook. I wanted to create a visual audiobook, and that was in hopes that the story will become even more relatable. Throughout this book, I certainly touch on some sensitive topics, but I try to do it in a way that helps it be more palatable and less triggering, and I try to bring that full circle by offering higher perspectives in many of the experiences I've had. If you haven't watched part 1, I encourage you to go back and do that. It'll give you lots of context about where the story is about to go. So without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 5, You Bitch. Mum wasn't always so diplomatic and forgiving when it came to the reactions of others. She was the voice of reason when it served her role as a mother and teacher to her children, but she got caught off guard. There was this one time just before I started school where Mum lost her shit. Mum had 4 children under 6 and no car. Thursday was shopping day. She would load me and my little sister up in a double buggy and carry my little brother while my older brother walked alongside her. We would walk 3 kilometres to the nearest supermarket, do a week's grocery shop, and taxi us all back home. There was one time that an old lady was in the vegetable aisle with us. I was running around being my joyful, cheeky self, and the lady and I made eye contact. She looked me up and down and then pouted, saying words like, "You poor thing." I frowned at her and then raised my eyebrow, completely oblivious to the connotation of her remark, but Mum knew what she meant. She picked me up under the arms, and before swiftly firing me into the shopping trolley, she scowled at the startled old lady, looked her directly in the eyes and said, "You bitch, there's nothing wrong with her." And just like that, we were off. We all looked at each other puzzled, but we knew better than to ask questions as Mum ripped through the aisles in record speed, pursed-lipped with cheeks flooded red. She was awesome like that. I used to look at her when I was feeling inadequate. She would be darting around fixing this and that, making life look easy and graceful, and I would think to myself, at least I have a pretty mum. On those cloudy days, I would borrow her beauty, and there were hundreds. She also had a limit on how much she would indulge my frequent pity parties. On the real bad days, I would come home on a rampage and declare war on the world. It was an overload of the nastiness that often came with the territory. I remember coming home from school after such a day, and I came across a dog standing on a street corner. He watched me as I walked past him and up the road. When I disappeared around the corner, he followed, never taking his eyes off me. When I got to my letterbox, I stopped, turned around, and screamed at him, "Fuck off!" I knew I was being ridiculous, but it felt so good saying that to someone. He didn't fuck off. In fact, he just carried on staring at me all the way to the gate. I proceeded into the house, threw open the door and flung my school bag across the kitchen. Mum had heard me coming, storming up the footpath in all my Hollywood glory. "What's wrong?" she pleaded. I stomped my way through to my bedroom, screaming, "Even the fucking dogs stare at me!" Before I got to slam the door, I heard Mum quietly chuckling to herself, followed by a self-collected yet suggestive, "Really, Jacqui?" She came into my room shortly after and sat next to me. I was trying to avoid eye contact with her because I knew how absurd my outburst had been. And when our eyes finally did meet, we both laughed before we got down to where the hurt really was coming from. We all have a side to us that is hidden from the world, where persona plays a part. It's a front we want the world to see and what we want them to know of us. It takes a brave soul to be vulnerable, especially in the face of society. But then there are people who have the ability to see through that persona and into your heart. They break down your walls with great ease. Mum was good at that. In fact, I have a few people that are good at that in my life. I will be in the middle of some kind of persona performance and notice their head tilting slightly, their eyes in a gentle gaze, slightly raised eyebrows, and a knowing smile on their face. My little brother has one of those looks. He knows how to break down my walls, and I surrender willingly every time. Chapter 6. The day she learnt to fly. What if I fall? Oh, but darling, what if you fly? It was 8 a.m. on a Wednesday, the 10th of February, 1982. I was 5 years old and it was my first day at school. I don't remember how it felt leading up to that morning, but even if I was apprehensive, it would have been futile. Not going to school was not an option. It just had to be done. I do, however, remember what it felt like walking into school the first time. I was swarmed by children, and at one point surrounded by what seemed like hundreds of 5, 6, and 7-year-olds trying to get a peek at me. I looked up at all the faces, some giggling, some chattering and asking questions, and some even grabbing at me. I remember feeling extremely overwhelmed and terrified that people would tease me and that no one would be kind. I begged Mum not to leave me. She did. But before she left, she said, "Instead of feeling scared that no one is going to be kind to you, find someone who is scared and be kind to them." That day, I learned how to fly. It is no secret that children's words can be cruel. They say it how they see it, and they see it how they've learnt or not learnt to see it. I've been called some crazy things. Aside from common callings such as dwarf, midget, and little person, I would often feel comments like, "Look at that little mum," "the tiny lady," or even "the fat kid." The last comment at the time was enough to flatten me right there on the sidewalk. These days, in the rare and right company, I laugh about it, but only with people I trust are laughing with me, and not just at me for their own benefit or at my expense. In all company, I do the jokes. Mine are heaps better anyway. The relentless piss takers are the ones that have the biggest impact on my confidence. It doesn't happen so much these days, but as a child, I was subjected to some pretty cruel behaviour. Children would follow me and chant cruel names while laughing and pointing. I managed myself pretty well and wouldn't cry until they were out of sight. It was usually when I was alone and an easy target that I would attract that kind of bullying attention. When I was in the company of friends and family, it was a whole different story. The eyes of many bearing down on their souls proved to be a rather effective repellent for the meanies. As we got older, it wasn't out of the ordinary for my little sister to chase children up trees for being overly rude to me. In fact, even now, in very isolated instances, given the chance and the promise of not getting caught, she probably still would, and I can't deny I wouldn't stop her. Chapter 7. Not So Gentle Giant. My biological father was a truck driver. I am told that he used to take me and my brother out on milk runs when we were babies. They told us that they would see 2 little heads happily bobbing up and down in the cab of the truck while he delivered milk to the locals in our small country town. I don't remember that, I was young. But then we left and never went back. Coincidence would have it that my stepdad was also a truck driver. He would drive the big trucks from one side of our small country to the other. We all loved to jump in the truck with him, but didn't often get the chance to. One sunny morning during the school holidays, a huge double cab truck pulled up outside our house, and he jumped out. The 4 of us squealed in delight and ran to the door. He took everyone but me. I don't know why, and I don't think it matters why. Whatever the reason, the outcome would be the same. I was left feeling as if though I wasn't the accepted child, the one with too many needs for my dad that day. I was the one that didn't get to go. I sat and watched from the window as they drove off down the road. With tears rolling down my cheeks, I asked Mum why I couldn't go. What had I done wrong? Again, I don't recollect her response, but I could see the hurt reflected in her eyes. She reached into a cupboard and pulled out a bag of sweets. We didn't get sweets often in those days. They didn't fix the hurt, but they distracted me from it. They numbed my pain, just for a moment. It was at that point in my childhood that I noticed something was missing. Someone was missing. I became aware of the void created by the absence of my father. What's more, at that young age, I learnt that the void could be filled and pacified by shoving something in my mouth. I remember the day of my mum and dad's wedding. At the age of 6, I still had a habit of peeing my pants, and bed for that matter. The adults were inside laughing and drinking and doing what adults do, and all of the children were running around outside. I don't know what prompted Dad to come outside, but he did. He had kindness in his eyes and a warm smile on his face. He joined me on the step, and I held my breath as he lifted me up onto his knee. What was meant to be a tender moment between Dad and daughter resulted in a large round wet patch on his lightly coloured dress pants. He had many gruff moments. In those days it was normal to physically discipline your child, and he certainly did, but he also had many gentle moments. The difficulty I had was not knowing which one of his moods he'd be in any given moment, and unexpectedly crossing paths with a seething giant. I think it is interesting what we choose to remember. When we want to resent someone, we will think of all the bad things they did, and when we want to celebrate or rekindle a feeling of affection for them, we remember all the wonderful kind things they did. In difficult relationships, it's not always possible to focus on their kindness, and sometimes it's not until death that we're able to put aside our anger and resentment in an attempt to make room for celebration of their finer qualities. I am more mindful of that these days, and forgiveness comes easier, but still there is much room for improvement. This particular moment I shared with my stepdad was of kindness and compassion. He stood up and, gently taking hold of my tiny hand, led me into the house. He changed my pants and then proceeded to iron his pants dry while I stood there watching on. I remember asking him if the iron was really hot. He just shook his head, scrunched up his nose and said, "Nah." His giant build and friendly demeanour demanded the admiration of many, including me that day. In that moment, I felt unconditionally loved by the big brown man I had called Dad, and that fond memory has stayed with me ever since. Chapter 8. Keep on Trucking. My mum and dad separated, and then later divorced when I was 9. It was to be that we would see him every other weekend or in the school holidays. We moved to a tiny little town called Kawhia, where I attended Kawhia Primary School. Mum wanted us to have more freedom than we did in Auckland, and had fallen in love with the idea of living there when we were holidaying there over the school summers. There, we were able to take our pocket money down to the dairy without the need of a chaperone. We would spend hours at the park alone, but we were banned from the water until Mum had joined us later. It was there where I learned to ride my first horse, and after a horrific fall, it would be the last. It was also a first in sport for me, where I joined the primary school netball team and dominated the centre position with much success. The netball team had always been called the Midgets, and it didn't occur to me at the time to care, but in my teenage years, I tore the team photo out of my family photo album and hid it, in fear that someone would notice the team name positioned on the letterboard in front. My recent achievement of coming full circle in all things little has encouraged a revival of such things out of the past. In my parents' divorce, there was a question as to whether or not Dad would pay child support for me and my older brother, being that we weren't biologically his. I don't know what the result of that was, but the fact that it was even asked reopened a wound and a familiar feeling of disconnection. As the years went by, that disconnection turned into emptiness and self-doubt, centered by a yearning that I would later learn to suppress. Circumstance, personal wiring, and life had created a void. I inquired about finding my father. I was told that I could find him when I was 16 years old, and what kept me pacified was the fairy tale that I had conjured up in my head. One day I would find my real dad, and he would save me. My biological father died 3 months after my 12th birthday. I responded with a nervous laugh that quickly turned into anger. No one was coming to save me. As much as we tried to make the funeral, it just didn't work out. But a year later, we received an invitation from my father's family to attend an unveiling of his headstone. I met so many family members that week, and in our culture, everyone is whānau, family. It took days for me to decipher which ones were immediate family and which were extended. My father was survived by my new stepmom and 5 brothers and sisters that I adored, but it didn't take long to realize that I didn't belong there either. A few years passed, our visits dwindled, but my fondness always remained. Something else that came out of my reconnection with my whānau was the opportunity to take a ride in my dad's truck alongside my father's colleague and good friend, Ali Back. It was the truck my father had driven for many years, and also the truck that took his life. On our travels, I learnt all the words to Kevin Bloody Wilson and how to smoke a filterless Port Royal Rollie. I had a blast, and I went as often as I could, and as we clocked up the miles, trucking up and down the North Island, he would tell me everything he could about my father. What he couldn't tell me was why he never came to find me. Every now and then, I would look out the window and pretend that my father was behind the wheel of that truck, and sometimes it almost felt like he was. It was around the same time I was introduced to violation of the sexual kind. The act was minor, some would say, but the repercussion was like helplessly watching your world turn upside down and inside out right before you. All the while, everyone you loved and felt connected to morphed into wearied strangers. Chapter 9. Facing Demons. My teens brought a myriad of temptations and experiences, as they do for most. They can be some of the most challenging years of our lives, yet some of the most exhilarating. My childhood insecurities became cemented among blissful ignorance, where love and substance took centre stage. My first memorable experience with alcohol was in the mid-morning march to the liquor store. Me and two of my 13-year-old friends talked our older friend into buying brandy and vodka for us after being dutifully turned away trying to buy it for ourselves. Delirious in our success and armed with a stash, we ventured down to the waterfront and hid amongst the mangroves. It took all of 45 minutes to devour the contents of both those bottles. After a hilarious round of mud wrestling, we collapsed in a heap on the bank of the river, with our skirts around our necks and mud up to our eyeballs. I remember looking up and making out 2 or 3 figures standing above us looking down. I recognised one of them from school. I think his name was Tama. There was a group of young Māori guys, teenagers, that would walk around and hang out at the parks and in town a lot. They were my friends and would always say hello to me, but it was common practice that we would admire each other from afar. I always felt safe when they were around, and I still feel extremely grateful for their presence during those times of my life. To me, they were almost comparable to what I would consider earth angels, even though their rough exterior would communicate otherwise. Eventually, the girls and I dragged each other home and showered. I don't know how our parents didn't catch us out that day, but they didn't. The discovery of boys and sex and alcohol and parties and smoking and drugs, as well as an introduction to eating disorders, managed to keep me busy and completely disillusioned, which suited me perfectly. There was much to avoid. I had loads of friends in high school and my fingers in all pies. I got bored with mediocre and was drawn to excitement and danger, and I found it. I wanted to experience everything my teenage years had to offer, and even though I was on a tight leash, my resourcefulness gave me access to all kinds of trouble. Mum played a part in keeping me grounded, and being little brought a few obstacles too, but nothing stopped me. I had already been in a wheelchair for a year before I started high school. Reflecting back on my first day, I remember just feeling anxious, frustrated, and ready to run over anyone that got in my way, and I did. I rode those halls in my electric scooter like I was the queen of the corridors. Some students snapped at me, some of them laughed, but most just let me be. The school staff made an effort to erect ramps and shift rooms around to suit my access needs, and all the students that were moved around to accommodate me were mostly happy about it. I was supported by senior students as buddies. They would get me safely from classroom to classroom, and my own friends would always raise a hand to assist, especially if it meant getting out of class 15 minutes early. Scootering through the school was a balancing act between scowl and charm. If I came across someone I was intimidated by, I would show no emotion, and eventually they disappeared off my radar altogether. I would soon learn to pay attention to those who were kind and would call out, "Hey, Jacqui," as I buzzed by. Community to me is a grouping of people with commonalities, whether it be belief, interests, or race. It is all much the same. High school was the first time I'd really noticed groups of people gathering because of these commonalities. There were absolutely no strict rules, and we all did what we wanted. I have fond memories of zooming through Charcoal Square, which was proudly named by its populace, and not all of them were of Māori descent. Some were my cousins, some extended family, but most were just friendly acquaintances. They were always playing handball and in hysterics for calling each other out. They would always say hello and happily let me pass. I felt more accepted by them than any other part of the school. And upon reflection, I've realised that it's my need to be accepted by everyone that had me foraging constantly for approval, wherever that was in any given time. I've never settled anywhere for long, and that has only just recently changed. Chapter 10. Lace Slippers. I was fortunate to have the friendships and associations I had at school. They kept my head up. Although I felt like I belonged, my electric scooter felt like a sore thumb. I had trouble walking long distances, and on cold days when the weather got into my joints, I could barely walk at all. On one particular day, the doctor told me that he doesn't even know how I managed to walk at all. An x-ray revealed my joints were a disconnected mess, and my walking posture reflected his findings. At 14, I was told that I would be in a wheelchair until I was old enough to qualify for hip replacements. I noticed looking at my brother's somber look on his face. We were like any other brother and sister, scrapping at every opportunity, and granted I was quite the bitch back then, but I could see the disappointment in his face. It broke my heart seeing him hurt and sad for me. He was the strong, unwavering one that had seen me through all my tough times. He was my constant. He was the only male role model that had never left, and I could see he wished he could fix this for me too. I wanted to make him and everyone else proud, but most of all, I wanted to prove the x-ray wrong. The next day, I started swimming. Every day for 6 months, I swam lengths of our local heated pool until I built enough muscle to support the weight I carried on my fragile joints. On the first day of my second year at high school, I drove my scooter to school, parked it up at the office, and left it there. By the end of the first term, I was walking to school, and by the end of the year, my little scooter was parked up in the shed collecting dust. That summer, me and a few friends drove her down the beach and buried her tired body in the dunes. It was a bittersweet day, followed by a bonfire and a bottle of Mississippi moonshine. High school was a huge learning curve for me, and in that I learnt about how to get what I wanted and avoid what I didn't. I learnt how a 16-year-old could hire out a hall for her 16th birthday, which would end in a police raid and a headline in the front page of the local news stating, "Alcohols and youths don't mix." I learnt how to make the most amazing friends and how to lose the most amazing friends. I learnt no matter how much I begged God to make me like everybody else, it wasn't going to happen. My first high school ball set in motion a series of events that tore me out of my safe place and into a brutal reality that was so confronting, even the most optimistic person would struggle to overcome. Leading up to the ball were ticket sales. Luckily, New Zealand schools aren't as commercially hyped up as they are in America, but the fairy tale still exists. I got to pick a ball dress pattern that Mum would tirelessly work to put together for me. Finding shoes was almost impossible, so she cut out leather soles and sewed elastic lace on them. I hadn't seen what all the other girls had chosen to wear yet, but every one of my fittings with Mum was exciting. When ticket sales started, all the couples rushed to buy theirs, and the school was abuzz with single boys wearing their hearts on their sleeves, while asking single girls to be their date. I wasn't alone in my solo-dom. There wasn't a lot of pressure to be accompanied to the ball, but nor was there a heart that wasn't inflated like an air balloon at the mere suspicion of being asked. It was about 8 p.m. at night when I heard a knock on my bedroom window. I was surprised to find two of my brother's friends grinning mischievously in the dark. I opened the window in time for them to pull out the guitar and start singing "I Love My Leather Jacqui," which is a play on a song that was called "I Love My Leather Jacket" by the Chills. It was cute, confusing, but cute, so I played along. After laughing strangely at their antics, we got to talking about the ball. It just so happened that I had the craziest crush on one of them, but after hundreds of hours on the phone, many attempts to get his attention, and numerous schoolgirl tears, I had resolved to the fact that he just didn't like me. We asked each other if either had dates and discovered we were all going solo. Some light banter continued when one of them got the idea to suggest that the other take me to the ball. I swallowed my tongue and for a fleeting second wondered if this little charade was in fact an attempt to ask me to the ball. When I turned to him, I saw his eyes wide in shock. Even in the pitch black, I saw him go red. I couldn't bear to watch him squirm in so much agony, so I quickly smiled and replied, "Don't be silly." As we all laughed, I watched my relieved, almost date gasp for air, and the two of them briefly exchange a glare. They confessed that they were looking for my brother, and then we shared a quick goodbye. After they'd driven away, I closed my curtains, sank under my bedcovers, and cried myself to sleep. Closer to the date of the ball, I was asked to go by a mutual friend of my older brother. We met at our pre-ball dinner and awkwardly arrived to the venue together. We reached the entrance, and everywhere I looked were tall girls in long dresses and gorgeously high heels. The dress that I had picked revealed my uniquely shaped legs and exposed my slippers for all to see. My date attempted to hold my hand, but I avoided his advances. Instead, I scurried inside and into a dark hall, terrified someone would notice my little legs and my unique footwear. I was so busy trying to hide all night that I ignored him completely. Halfway through the evening, the lights came on and everyone made their way to the common room for supper. I was already so anxious and vulnerable that I didn't move from my seat. Instead, when everyone had left, I ran to the bathroom and carefully removed my slippers, stuffing them into my purse. I desperately wanted to leave, but we weren't allowed to leave without a chaperone. When I got back, the lights were out and the music had resumed, but this time it was different. The DJ had switched something more traditional and everyone was pairing up, standing face to face and slow dancing. I saw my date walk towards me from across the room and I knew he was going to ask me to dance. We used to practice the traditional styles of dancing in class at primary school. Things were so simple then. My heart had not yet been broken and I was still oblivious to the jokes that were played out at my expense. And furthermore, being a little person who required a wheelchair didn't quite render you a desirable girlfriend. Every unkind incident that had brought me to this moment resulted in my refusal to dance. The chairs that lined the walls of the hall were too high for me to sit on gracefully, and after 2 hours of standing, my little legs were shuddering in agony. I spent the rest of the night crouched on the floor, in between chairs, in the dark, counting the minutes down until I could go home. My date was a perfect gentleman, and even after the debacle that was our school hall, he pursued me until I believed his advances were genuine, and I entered into my first real teenage relationship. He was everything a girl could ask for. I think he was the first amazing guy that showed interest and honest affection for me, and the first boyfriend I would break up with as a result of my conditioned and self-acquired insecurities. It has been a long belief that if somebody liked me, then there had to be something wrong with them. This behaviour would later be coined as self-sabotage. There were a few fleeting encounters of the sexual kind, but nothing poignant until I left school. My first love was to set the scene on what would be an echo in relationships for many, many years to come, but your first love is like that. I lost friends to suicide and car accidents in those years, which was such a foreign feeling that I never quite understood. It brought my friends and me together in a way that would not have done otherwise, and our unbreakable bond still continues 20 years later. The normal teenage disconnection I had with my family had been replaced by a family of friends, except this family only knew what I chose to divulge of myself, which made hiding my insecurities and skeletons so much easier. It was pretty perfect, really. I could pretend that I was someone else, and the substances I abused enabled me to believe what I was selling. There was one thing I couldn't hide, no matter how convincing the mask, and that was my littleness. There was a point where I could have become a bitter, angry little thing and hide away from the world. But it turned out I had more fight in me than that. My dependency on substance and partying was stronger than my desire to run and hide. Hiding meant solitude, and solitude meant facing demons. Poem, Falling Faces. Falling faces of long-lost souls, memories devoured into deep dark holes. For all those who have been lost and cannot be found, is the time for our heart and mind to be bound. For a place that is so much closer than it seems, heaven the place that is thought of in our dreams. Chapter 11, Hanging Up the Mask. Many wear masks, some of deception, some of entertainment, and some of protection. It is a way to transform our audience's perception of what lies behind it. Masks can be temporary and amusing, and they can also be necessary and deliberate. Some masks are external and some internal, both convincing nonetheless. We mask our pain to fool others, and we mask our pain using substance and addiction in an attempt to fool ourselves. I have an impressive collection of self-made masks. My most convincing was of fear. Fear that people would expose my vulnerabilities and not like what they found. Fear that someone will see my demons and decide that I was weak and easy for the taking. Fear that people would discover I was once abandoned and would leave me too. At the age of 16, my mask of choice was that of deterrence. I was hiding behind a mask of anger and fire in order to deter unwanted attention. Since I could remember, people had watched me, pointed, stared, laughed, and shouted out unkind words that would draw me out in any crowd and shine a thick floodlight on my red cheeks. All I ever wanted was to blend in, but after many attempts of unsuccessful normalcy, I felt like all that was left to do was shrink into the darkness and fade away. So I wore a mask. I would scowl at anyone who would look like they would challenge me. I would steal a dark stare to ward off any attempts to expose me to others who hadn't yet seen me. If I wasn't able to pull off a performance in my mask, I wouldn't go on stage. I'd shy away from crowded places and miss out on experiences just to save face. My life was an exhausting play, scene after scene of avoidance and scorn. The more I wore the mask, the less people had the chance to connect with me, and the more I avoided life, the more life avoided me. Some say that to combat fear you must stare it directly in the face in order to render it powerless, and that on the other side of fear is freedom. So fueled with my smokescreen dependence, I armoured up and called in for reinforcements. Removing your mask is not for the faint-hearted, nor is it a matter of impatience. It is a journey of determination and small goals, small victories. No one truly knew that I was buried so deeply in this crippling darkness, because I had become an actress of sorts, hidden almost completely behind the mask and fallen so deeply into character. It was clear I needed support, so I started talking. I started to tell those who loved me and those who I could trust what I needed and why. Pretty soon I noticed that when I went out into crowds or even small places where people gathered, I was almost enclosed in a circle of protection. The people that loved and encouraged me would speak for me when I was brought face to face with what then I could describe as the enemy. They did this for me until I was strong enough to find my own voice and speak for myself. It took time, trial, and error. In my efforts, I kept the security of my mask in my back pocket just in case. When I was faced with anxious encounters, I would slip my hand into my back pocket and grip my mask for comfort. The day eventually came where I was able to step out into the crowd and speak for myself. I had a way to go before I would completely be comfortable in my own skin, but what I had achieved so far was enough to step out into the world again. These days, that mask hangs on a wall as a reminder of my accomplishment. She will always be there should I need her. I consider her a dear friend that helped me through one of the toughest challenges of my life. Chapter 12, Terminating Love. The matter of having sex for the first time was as unromantic and perplexing as it is for most. My first sexual encounter was a mixture of fumbling around in the dark naked and apologising for our clumsiness. We'd both had hit and misses and almost theres in our past, but this was different. We were both equally eager to be with each other. It was careful, thought out, and considerate. The thing about young lovers is once they find their way there, for a time, nothing can drag them away. Falling in love is everything they tell you it is, and more. It is like a roller coaster ascending to its highest point over and over and over again. The descent and crashing out of love at full speed is more brutal than anyone can ever describe. I fell pregnant at 17, and although shocked, I felt relieved and elated in the fact that I was able to get pregnant at all. I had been too scared to ask anyone if it was possible for me to be a mother one day. I was so proud of myself that without consideration of what was to come, I told everybody. My partner at the time, he wasn't ready to be a father. Well, not the kind of father he wanted to be anyway, and even though it was hard to hear, at the time I later came to respect his honesty. I was too scared to do it on my own, so I didn't. My mum sat me down and said, we could be selfish and do this together. But we didn't. 2 days later, I was to wake up after a termination in excruciating emotional agony. Even before I opened my eyes, they were filled with tears and I screamed, I hate him. Over and over again, I screamed how much I hated him. By the time my partner had arrived, I had pulled myself together enough to hide the hate that I had for him. I felt that expressing my hate, anger, and sorrow would make it even harder for him to love an already unlovable person, and I couldn't bear him to leave. That afternoon, I returned to an empty house. I refused my mother's request to go home with her, so instead she tucked me up in my own bed, emptied shopping bags full of groceries in the kitchen, and put the phone next to my bed. It took my partner and I 5 days to reconcile, and less than that for me to forgive him. It turned out it wasn't him that I hated anyway. I hated myself for being so weak in choosing the love of a man over my own baby. Poem, Fear of Tears. I fear my tears. They tell of my pain, my mistreatment. They tell people that someone decided I wasn't worthy of love. Chapter 13, Dead All Along. The relationship with the father of my not-to-be-born child became toxic after that, and if he hadn't have left the country, it would have become even more so. When the day arrived for him to leave, although difficult, we both knew it was right. I started visiting my father's grave from time to time after that, and often because I found myself lost and in need of healing, but sometimes because I was angry. I resented him and often stood at his graveside asking, why in the 12 years of my life that you were alive could you not have got in your car and driven 3 hours north to find me? Was it because you didn't love me? Was it because I had done something to make you hate me? I would have forgiven you, Dad, but you never came back. Poem, Never Came Back. It burnt the day you walked out. Like a stinging, festering pain, it burnt. Too young to remember, but that doesn't numb the pain, because you never came back. You left and you never came back. On rainy days, when I hated the world, I would sit at the window and will you to walk up the driveway. I willed it with tears. I needed you to be my hero, but you left and you didn't come back. The children teased me and laughed at me. You were supposed to lift me up and save me from the hate, but you'd left and you never came back. My heart was betrayed and beaten. He promised to stay and love me forever, so I gave him my innocence. And then he left and he never came back. But you weren't there to protect me because you'd left and you never came back. I carried anger and resented you. I dreamed of the day that I would face you. I would scream and curse and beat my fists against your chest. Then you would say something that made all the pain go away and I would forgive you. But you died and can never come back.